Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the sprawling, incense-hazed streets of Imperial China, where palace walls shimmer with gold, scholars pace in silken robes, and someone somewhere is very annoyed about your lack of filial piety. You'll begin your journey in Chang'an, the bustling capital of the Tang Dynasty. But fair warning, the glamour stops at the gates. You're not a pampered aristocrat. No. You're a regular citizen, which means your bed is straw, your clothes are scratchy, and you're about to spend a full hour trying to boil clean water. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the city gates of Chang'an, dodging a donkey cart stacked high with turnips and a monk wielding a begging bowl. The air smells of sesame oil, charcoal smoke, and always faintly human waste. You're immediately struck by the scale. This place is massive. Over 1 million people. And you, in your rough hemp tunic, are one of them. Everything here is ordered and hierarchical, including the streets, which run in rigid grids like a cosmic spreadsheet. Imperial edict demands symmetry. Feng Shui insists on balance. And you, friend, are deeply unbalanced because you just stepped in something warm that used to be in a chamber pot. Chang'an may be the cultural hub of the world, hosting Persian merchants, Indian monks, and Korean diplomats. But that doesn't mean daily life is easy. You see a poet on the corner declaiming verses in exchange for rice balls. He's probably famous. Or will be after he dies of exposure. That's how fame tends to work here. The buildings are wood and tile, curving like eyebrows toward heaven. You pass courtyards where families sip bitter tea under gnarled plum trees. You also pass several beggars and a group of constables enthusiastically chasing someone who's probably only guilty of tax evasion, which is practically a hobby here. Class status defines everything. If you're nobility, you ride a lacquered carriage. If you're a merchant, you're rich, but still lower than a scholar. If you're a peasant, which statistically you are, you don't ride. You carry, including yourself, up and down hills, often with a basket of firewood. The emperor lives in the north in a palace so vast you'd need days just to sweep it. You won't see it, of course, unless you become a eunuch or a criminal. Or both. Historians still argue whether palace access was more dangerous than the battlefields. You can probably guess. Markets line the city in divided districts. There's the East Market, controlled, orderly, patrolled, and the West Market, chaotic, delicious, and slightly illegal. You'll find everything from spices to scrolls to a man who swears this ginseng root cured his cousin's goat of melancholy. But even in the heart of this cosmopolitan city, your options are limited. Bathhouses, our public food, is inconsistent, and the local entertainment includes watching men balance teacups on their heads while reciting Confucian doctrine. Fun. A fringe tidbit. It's said that in some corners of the capital, ghost marriages are secretly arranged. If a young woman dies unmarried, her parents may still wed her to the spirit of another deceased person. The couple's photos are burned together, and sometimes grave goods are exchanged. Romantic, you decide. Night falls early thanks to curfews. The city, gates shut tight. Drums echo from watchtowers, And if you're not already home, you're either in serious trouble or working in one of the night markets where legal definitions blur like cheap ink in the rain. And through it all, you're learning a crucial truth. Imperial splendor looks best from a distance. Up close, it's sweaty, uneven, and frequently smells of pickled cabbage. Still, there's something magical in the lantern-lit alleys and the echo of bamboo flutes drifting over rooftops in the soft hush of silk sleeves brushing against stone. Just don't romanticize it too much. Tomorrow, you've got chores exams, maybe a brief encounter with a corrupt tax official. The empire may be celestial, but you still have to scrub your own latrines. You wake to the sound of chickens screaming at the dawn, not chirping screaming. Apparently, one's gotten into a territorial dispute with the family goose again. Welcome to your home in the heart of Imperial China. A courtyard house, modest and sun-baked, shared with 3 generations, 2 goats, and one surprisingly assertive grandmother. Your bedding is a straw mat, possibly softer than your uncle's disposition. There's no mattress, just woven reeds, and if you're lucky, a blanket that smells like both camphor and ancient socks. You stretch careful not to elbow your cousin who's snoring beside you with a fist wrapped around a dried apricot. Privacy isn't a thing here. Walls are thin, doors are optional, and eavesdropping is practically a family sport. You pad across the clay floor to splash water on your face from a communal basin. The water is frigid and suspiciously murky. You're not the first to use it. Or the third. Toothbrushing. A twig frayed at the end. If you're fancy, you rub on a bit of crushed mint. If you're not, you chew and spit and hope nobody notices your breath smells like fermented millet. Outside in the courtyard, your grandmother is already squatting over a small stove, coaxing fire from yesterday's ash, using nothing but lung power and quiet fury. She hands you a bowl of thin rice porridge and glares until you eat it. You wonder if she was born with that glare, or if years of raising children with wooden sandals gave it to her. Roosters strut between your legs as you sit on a low stool, dodging the goat who likes to chew on people's hair. The sun peeks over the tiled roofs, casting long shadows and catching on the steam that rises from the morning wash line, where someone's underwear is frozen into strange architectural shapes. Your father is chopping kindling. Your older brother is preparing to head to his apprenticeship. He's learning to dye silk, which means his fingernails are permanently purple. Your sister, meanwhile, is already hauling buckets to the communal well, grumbling about how her husband better come back from the provinces with something shiny this time. This house isn't big, but it's functional. There's one main hall for formal meals, which are rare, and a series of side rooms where people sleep store pickled radishes and argue about ancestral shrine arrangements. The windows are covered in oiled paper that lets in light, but no detail, like living inside a lampshade. A common quirk, many families keep crickets in little bamboo cages, not as food, but as entertainment. You can hear their rhythmic chirping, like nature's version of a fidget spinner. Kids bet on cricket fights. Old men claim certain crickets sing in minor keys. Historians still argue whether this hobby was meditative or mildly unhinged. There's a shrine in the corner too, with incense curling lazily into the air. A stick of sandalwood is always burning, offering respect to ancestors and gently masking the smell of your brother's feet. You nod to it out of habit or fear. No one skips a bow to Great Uncle Wen, who once allegedly haunted a rice bin for 6 months. Now, it's time to clean the latrine. It's a pit toilet, just a wooden plank with a hole over a sunken barrel that gets emptied every few days. That job usually falls to the lowest ranking family member. Today, that's you. You try not to breathe through your nose as you carry the bucket to the compost heap. The goat follows hopeful for snacks. The goat is wrong. Your aunt is sweeping the courtyard with a broom made of twigs, humming a tune about lost love and sweet beans. She pauses only to swat a rooster off the laundry. The rhythm of morning life is oddly soothing, like a chaotic symphony of wooden clacks, sleepy grumbles, and steaming porridge. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to live in the palace, to have perfumed baths and silk curtains. But then you remember palace life means politics poison and possibly being buried alive if you accidentally look the emperor in the eye. Here at least death usually waits its turn. Still, it's not easy. Your cousin is coughing again. His chest sounds like a winded bellows, and no one has money for the herbalist. You make a mental note to gather herbs later, or at least bribe the neighbor's cat to scare off the rats nesting under the granary. You rub your eyes, try to shake the straw from your hair, and steel yourself for the rest of the day. But for now, you sit in the courtyard, sipping the last of the lukewarm tea, watching the sunlight hit the rooftop tiles just so. There's a rooster crowing somewhere, or maybe screaming again. It's breakfast time technically, though that term might be a bit generous. You sit cross-legged on a low bamboo stool, while your aunt ladles out the family meal from a large clay pot that's been simmering since before dawn. The smell is complicated, earthy, tangy, with a suspicious undertone that suggests something might still be alive in there. What you get is congee rice porridge so thin it verges on a beverage. Floating inside is a solitary pickled radish slice, half a fish bone, and if the stars have aligned, a glimmer of pork fat. Not meat, just fat, enough to grease the top like a mirage. You slurp dutifully while trying to ignore the crunch. Millet husks probably, hopefully. Across from you, your cousin is gnawing on what looks like a chicken foot. He's focused, as though the sinews hold secrets. Maybe they do. After all, this is a world where ox bones are boiled for weeks into jellies and duck tongues are considered high art. Protein is protein, especially when your family eats nose to tail and nothing is wasted, not even the tail. You eye a jar in the corner that holds pickled eggs preserved in clay, ash, salt, and thyme. The kind that emerge greenish and with the texture of a melted eraser. They're prized delicacies, but you're saving that thrill for a festival or a dare. Outside, a peddler walks by, hawking sesame cakes and candied hawthorn sticks. You eye him with the hunger of 1,000 rice bowls. Your mother swats you gently with a chopstick. "We have food at home," she says. She means well, but you saw her spit out a rock from the rice last night. Mainstream fact. Wheat noodles, dumplings, and steamed buns were popular in northern regions, thanks to the drier climate that favored wheat over rice. In Chang'an Street, vendors compete to create ever fluffier baozi. But your family, you're eating what's available. And today, that's millet with a side of nostalgia. Your grandfather reminisces again about how food was better in his day. Even the tofu had flavor, he insists while nibbling a radish slice like it's a delicacy. You nod respectfully. Arguing with elders is considered rude even if they once mistook soap for dessert. Then there's the soy sauce, dark pungent brewed in ceramic urns and ladled out with reverence. It covers a multitude of sins, including the fish head you're staring at now, which may or may not be winking at you. A fringe tidbit: some families use fermented bean curd, so aged it was referred to as stinky tofu. The aroma could clear a room, but it was also thought to improve digestion. Historians still argue whether this culinary creation was born of necessity, ingenuity, or a terrible prank gone too far. As you chew, you notice the chopsticks are splintering slightly. Bamboo reused until they resemble toothpicks. There's no dishwashing soap here, just ash and elbow grease. If something's greasy, you rub it with rice bran. If it's moldy, well, mold has its uses too. Meals are fast, not because anyone is rushing, but because there's not much to draw out. You sip a weak tea made from scorched rice water, barely caffeinated but warm. It tastes like toasted hopes and soggy firewood. Still, it's yours. You hear your neighbor boasting again. They managed to trade 2 cabbages for half a duck last week. It's hanging in their window now, shriveled and taunting like a delicious hostage. You make a note to visit them soon, preferably around dinner. The rooster jumps onto the table. Again, your cousin throws a sandal misses and hits the family cat, who is unimpressed. Everyone continues eating as though nothing happened. This is the rhythm of life. You scrape your bowl clean and lick the spoon. Not because it's polite, but because it might be your last calories until sundown. Food security is fluid. Some years there's harvest, others there's famine. You've learned not to waste a single grain. Breakfast ends with a burp, publicly acceptable, even expected. It signals satisfaction. Whether or not you're truly satisfied is beside the point. You're full-ish. You roll your shoulders and prepare for a long day of labor on an almost empty stomach. You glance back at the pot, still warm, still steaming. It's a small comfort in a big empire. And tomorrow, with luck, there might be 2 fish bones. Now that your bowl is scraped clean and your stomach is half full of hot water, it's time to earn your keep. A phrase your uncle says daily while not lifting anything heavier than a scroll. Work in Imperial China isn't just tiring, it's relentless, varied, and almost always underpaid. Unless you're nobility or very lucky, your job isn't 1 job, it's 10. You start with sweeping. Everyone sweeps. Street stalls, the temple courtyard if you're feeling pious or guilty. The broom is made of straw and indignity, and by the time you're done, you've inhaled enough dust to qualify as a mud brick. Then comes your main trade. You lucky listener are apprenticed at a silk dyeing workshop. It sounds glamorous until you realize it means soaking threads in vats of fermented indigo while praying the dye doesn't stain your lungs. Your fingernails are permanently blue. Your sleeves smell like vinegar. Your boss yells in couplets. Silk is precious. Imperial inspectors come by occasionally to ensure no thread is misplaced. A missing spool could cost you more than your wages. It might cost you a hand. Historians still argue whether such severity was for discipline or simply to scare people into working faster. Inside the workshop, other apprentices mutter jokes about officials while stirring the dye pots with long wooden paddles. One swears he saw a ghost in the drying chamber. Another claims to have spilled dye on a magistrate's robe on purpose. You all laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's the only rebellion you can afford. After lunch, which is spoiler another bowl of rice. You run errands. The Dai Master's scroll needs delivering to the guild hall. It's a mile across town and must be carried upright under threat of severe browbeating. You dodge rickshaws, stumble into a chicken vendor, and arrive panting just in time to be ignored. If you're not in silk, you might be working in a rice field. That means bent spine, sunburnt arms, and the lingering fear of leeches. Or maybe you're in ceramics spinning pots with such speed your wrists ache before noon. If you're really unfortunate, you're a night soil collector hauling away waste before dawn with only a wooden yoke and shame for company. And let's not forget the exam takers. If you're a male from a moderately literate family, you're expected to study. For decades, the imperial exam system is theoretically a meritocracy, but in practice, it's a slow descent into madness via Confucian quotations. You memorize the 4 books, the 5 classics, and countless official commentaries, all in hopes of one day becoming a bureaucrat. And if you pass, you get promoted to a life of writing tax forms in triplicate with a brush made from weasel hair. Scholars often joke quietly that death is preferable to desk duty, fringe tidbit. Some families hired professional exam crammers, elderly men who knew the Confucian texts backward and could recite them while juggling. In rare cases, stand-ins even took exams for others, disguised in matching robes and hopeful ambition. You, meanwhile, are back at the workshop, picking loose hairs from the silk. It's tedious, but it beats hauling bricks. Barely. Across the alley, you see a team of brickmakers, stomping clay, with their feet singing work songs that sound more like curses. Their hands are cracked, their backs bent, but their rhythm is oddly hypnotic. There's no weekend, no paid vacation. The concept of leisure exists mainly for the wealthy. For you, rest is what happens when the sun sets and your hands physically stop moving. That, or if you fake a foot injury and limp dramatically until your grandmother calls your bluff. A friend of yours recently started making shadow puppets, cut from dried animal hide and painted with lamp black. He performs at tea houses telling epic tales of warriors and ghosts. It's art, yes, but it's also side income. Everyone hustles. Even monks sometimes moonlight as calligraphers for cash. By dusk, you're exhausted. Your tunic is damp. Your arms ache, and there's still one more errand to run, a bolt of fabric to deliver to the dye merchant's cousin. Who lives uphill? Naturally. You trudge through the lantern-lit streets, dodging drunks and stray dogs, your feet blistered, and your patience as thin as rice paper. But you deliver the cloth nod politely and are rewarded with a single candied plum. It's sour, sticky, and divine. Back home, you collapse on the floor mat and massage your calves. Tomorrow will be the same. Maybe worse, but for now, you rest and dream briefly of being reborn as someone with fewer jobs, like an imperial cat. Let's talk hygiene, or rather the spirited attempt at it. You begin your cleansing ritual with a rinse of your face using water from a basin that's already been visited by 4 family members and a very opinionated duck. Soap not quite. It's more likely a grayish paste made from rice husks, ash, and vague hope. Your skin is technically cleaner, but you also smell faintly of last night's cooking fire. For your teeth, it's the old faithful a twig. You chew the end until it frays, forming nature's toothbrush. Some people dip it in salt. Others, if they're brave, dab it in fermented bean curd water, for that minty rotten zest. You do neither. You just chew and pretend your gums aren't retreating like an overtaxed bureaucracy. Baths happen weekly, if you're lucky, daily, if you're nobility, and never if you're rebellious. Bathhouses dot the city, separated by class and gender, but united in their utter lack of privacy. You strip down in front of strangers, step into lukewarm communal tubs, and try to ignore the man next to you using the water as a spittoon. Fringe tidbit. Wealthy bathhouses sometimes employed ear cleaning specialists, complete with long bamboo tools and philosophical monologues. Some patrons claimed it was more relaxing than acupuncture. Others simply fainted. At home, bathing is DIY. You heat water over a fire, haul it to a ceramic basin, and hope it doesn't cool into regret. One bucket, one washcloth, 17 curious relatives passing by the doorway. You wash quickly, discreetly, and never your entire body. At once it's believed that doing so weakens the qi. Hair is washed even less often. You braid it, oil it, and hope the jasmine scent overpowers everything else. Lice combs are passed around like treasured heirlooms. Your grandmother swears by sesame oil as a scalp treatment. Your scalp swears back. Clothing hygiene is its own adventure. You wear the same robe until it physically tries to walk away. Washing clothes involves slapping them against river stones until either the stains or your wrists give out. In the winter, garments freeze into stiff origami and are hung like ominous flags on bamboo poles. But despite all this, you begin to notice something odd people smell. Human. Not chemical. Not perfume, just human. Sweat, smoked tofu, and occasionally sandalwood. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And there is a system. You wash your hands before temple rituals. You purify yourself after funerals. Babies are cleaned with warm tea leaves and wrapped in cloth diapers that are astonishingly reusable. Hygiene is a dance sometimes elegant, sometimes chaotic, but always present in some form. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on ritual cleanliness in Confucian texts translated into practical hygiene improvements. Some say yes, pointing to structured bathing days and tooth care. Others argue it was more about moral purity than microbial safety. Both sides agree the bathwater was never ever clean by the end. A memorable local practice, people use ear scoops, tiny curved tools made of silver or bone to gently remove wax. In the right hands, it's soothing. In the wrong ones, it's an ear infection waiting to happen. You once tried it yourself. Once. Nail care is minimal, unless you're a scholar or aristocrat, in which case long nails are a status symbol. Manual labor shortens them anyway. You keep yours trimmed with a dull knife and occasionally chew them when stressed, an act your aunt compares to monkey behavior. To dry off, you stand in the courtyard and let the wind do the work. No towels, just patience and modesty, preserved only by a strategically held gourd ladle. You watch as your neighbor sprinkles herbs into her bath mugwort, for cleansing ginger for circulation and chrysanthemum for beauty. You consider asking to share. Then you remember her toddler lives in that tub too. You reconsider. Despite the communal awkwardness, bathhouses are social centers. Gossip flows as freely as water. Alliances form. Marriages are proposed. Disputes are settled sometimes with soap, sometimes with side-eye. You once heard someone negotiate a dowry while rinsing their armpits. And at the end of the day, you crawl into your bedding a little cleaner, a little colder, and significantly more aware of every splinter on the wash bucket. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again, or maybe not. Hygiene, like dignity, is optional in a drought. But you have your twig, and that's enough. Let's get this over with toilets. You didn't come here for this, but imperial life doesn't pause for politeness. Your household's latrine is in the far corner of the courtyard, behind a low wall, and some hopeful bamboo plants that do little to hide the stench. It's a squat setup, literally. A wooden plank with an oval hole cut into it sits atop a deep pit. No flush, no privacy. Just you, a bucket of ash, and the possibility of eye contact with a passing chicken. You've brought a bamboo scoop, known affectionately as the butt ladle. It's used to pour water over yourself after doing your business. Sometimes you wipe with a soft stick, sometimes with paper, if you're lucky. Imperial toilet paper does exist made from mulberry bark pulp, but it's reserved for officials and scholars. You're using leaves, probably. There's a chamber pot under your bed for night use because walking to the latrine in the dark is how you meet ghosts, or worse, snakes. In the morning, the pot gets emptied into the compost pile. Carefully. Splash risk is real. Fringe tidbit. In some parts of the empire, families collected night soil, human waste, and sold it to farmers as fertilizer. It was a thriving trade. There were even rivalries between collectors. Historians still argue whether this was efficient sanitation or just very committed recycling. You crouch and try to focus on the bird song. A neighbor is singing an old folk tune about spring onions and unrequited love. The lyrics are oddly specific. Your aunt walks by and critiques your squatting posture. Wider stance, she says. You oblige. She nods approvingly. Toilet routines are dictated by class, of course. Nobility have separate latrines with perfumed incense and attendants who clean up with long-handled scoops and averted gazes. The emperor, rumor has it, sits on a lacquered box with golden hinges. You sit on splinters and hope today is not the day the board gives out. In urban areas like Chang'an, public toilets line the markets. They're communal and gender-segregated, sort of. You step inside a public facility just once. It's crowded loud, and someone is trying to sell dumplings near the entrance. Appetite gone. Bathhouses often double as latrines. There's a system involving gravity bamboo chutes and buckets that you don't fully understand. All you know is that everything flows downhill literally and socially. Flies are inevitable. You learn to swat them with the fluid grace of a calligraphy master. Some families hang pungent herbs to repel insects, wormwood, mugwort, anything that smells worse than what it's hiding. There are rules, too, superstitions. Don't talk while squatting. It invites bad luck. Always knock on the door frame, even if there's no door. And never, ever enter after your grandfather, unless you're prepared to question the meaning of life. Your cousin once fell in. He was 6. He came out changed. Now, he speaks only in proverbs and avoids bean curd. A mainstream fact. During the Tang and Song dynasties, wealthier homes featured thunder jugs, elegant ceramic chamber pots with poetic inscriptions. One famous example bore the line, "Even the wind respects solitude." You suspect the wind had no choice. There's little shame in discussing bodily functions here. It's part of life. Farmers talk dung, like nobles talk poetry. Some people even tell fortunes based on, well, consistency. You try not to think about it. When it rains, the pit floods. That's a whole ordeal. Boards float. Everyone panics. The goat makes choices it can't take back. You once spent 3 hours with a ladle and a prayer trying to save a sandal. But oddly, you get used to it. You develop rhythm resilience and quads of steel. And every now and then, when the breeze is just right and the stars align, you almost forget you're hovering over a hole in the earth while holding a scoop made for someone half your size. Almost. You toss a final scoop of ash into the pit, pat yourself dry with a blessedly soft scrap of linen, and exit with dignity mostly intact. You survived another visit. That counts for something. Maybe everything. A fashion. That noble endeavor where beauty and misery are stitched together with a bone needle. In Imperial China, how you look says everything about who you are, your status, your job, your family, and your ability to withstand both heat stroke and social scrutiny. You start your day by wrapping yourself in layers. Yes, layers, even in summer. Your base layer is a linen tunic, then a heavier cotton robe, followed by an overcoat if you're going out. Why so much cloth? Because modesty is non-negotiable and sunburns are unbecoming. You're sweating before breakfast, but you look socially acceptable, almost. If you're female, you bind your waist tightly with a sash, pinch your cheeks to simulate health, and maybe apply a little rouge made from crushed safflower petals. Or if you're fancy pig fat, tinted with cinnabar. That's right, beauty begins with bacon and poison. No wonder nobody smiles in paintings. For men, the goal is elegance, not comfort. A scholar wears wide sleeves and a stiff cap that makes him look perpetually windblown. Laborers opt for shorter robes belted high so their knees can breathe. Officials, meanwhile, don structured gowns with embroidered rank badges, cranes for high-status tigers, if you want people to think twice before cutting in line. Footwear is its own trial. Cloth shoes, straw sandals, or if you're of a certain class, platform, shoes that elevate both your heels and your ego. But for some women, it's not about shoes at all. It's about feet. Fringe tidbit. Foot binding, while not yet widespread, in Tang times, becomes a prominent fashion during later dynasties. Girls as young as 5 have their feet broken and reshaped into lotus feet, prized for their smallness and delicacy. The process is excruciating lifelong and considered irresistibly alluring by poets and sadists alike. Historians still argue whether the practice started as elite vanity or political control disguised as beauty. You pass a noblewoman on the street. She moves with careful, short steps, her balance perfected through pain. Her robes shimmer in teal and gold. Her feet practically useless, but she looks the part, and that's what counts. Hairstyles are equally elaborate. You tie your hair into a bun, secure it with a wooden pin, and maybe add a decorative comb shaped like a phoenix. Men grow theirs long and knotted atop their heads, a sign of dignity and occasionally lice. There's a street vendor who sells nothing but hair oil and flea combs. He's doing brisk business. If you're mourning someone, you wear plain white, the color of death. If you're newlywed, it's red, and more red gowns, sashes, hairpins, even socks, all dipped in joy and symbolism. You once wore red to a funeral by mistake. You're still not allowed near your cousin's in-laws. Children go mostly unclothed in the summer, less laundry, more airflow. Elders wear wool in winter, even indoors, and complain anyway. Everyone complains. Clothing is seasonal. Yes, but it's also dictated by Confucian propriety and the inescapable judgment of the neighborhood granny patrol. There's a subtle language in stitches. Pleats signal patience. Silk sleeves whisper wealth. Even embroidery has the meaning: bamboo for resilience, lotus for purity, peaches for long life. You once tried to embroider your name and accidentally spelled goose. The robe still hangs in shame. Your own wardrobe consists of 2 working robes. One formal robe for festivals, and a patchy underlayer that your aunt calls ventilated luxury. You rotate them carefully, airing out each garment in the courtyard, hoping the sun will bleach out both stains and regrets. Washing clothes is a group event. You head to the riverbank with other villagers scrubbing and slapping cloth on flat stones. It's social splashy and always downhill from the latrines, so be quick. If you're lucky, someone starts a work song. If not, you're serenaded by the local frog chorus. A mainstream fact. Imperial fashion followed strict sumptuary laws. Only certain ranks could wear certain colors. Yellow, for example, was reserved for the emperor. Wearing it without permission could get you demoted, fined, or exiled to someplace where fashion means not being eaten by wolves. You try on your festival robe. It's stiff, embroidered with clouds, and smells like cedarwood and ancestral expectations. You admire yourself briefly in the surface of a polished bronze mirror. You look like someone pretending to be more important than they are. That's fashion in a nutshell. And when you finally undress at night, your body sighs. Free of sashes, pins, and heat, you stretch out on your mat like a liberated dumpling. The clothes are hung carefully folded with hope and left to rest until tomorrow's performance begins again. Because in Imperial China, you don't just wear clothes, you wear your place in the world. And today, you wore it well, even if your armpits disagree. Romance in Imperial China is rarely about fluttering fans and secret poetry beneath the moonlight, though that does happen occasionally. And it's quite pretty until someone's father finds out and ruins everything. More often, love is a well-arranged contract between 2 families who both pretend to enjoy pickled lotus root. You, dear listener, are not the star of a love ballad. You're the 3rd concubine in a household where your husband is 64, owns 6 geese, and still gets misty-eyed about Tang poetry competitions. He calls you Little Plum, which is endearing until you realize he calls the cat the same thing. Marriage here is a transaction. Your parents arranged it when you were 14, and the bride price was a set of lacquer bowls, some silk, and a reluctant goat. On your wedding day, you wore red from head to toe, sobbed behind a veil, and were carried to his home in a sedan chair. Firecrackers went off. People cheered. You were mostly trying not to vomit from nerves. As a concubine, you rank below the wife, but above the servants, an awkward limbo where you're expected to produce heirs, embroider seasonal motifs, and never ever contradict the first wife who has been quietly plotting your downfall since you stepped into the household. Your husband recites love poems to you. They're lovely. if you ignore the bits that compare you to a well-pruned bonsai. He visits once a week, maybe. The rest of the time, you spend embroidering phoenixes, avoiding gossip, and plotting small, harmless revenges on the second concubine who always steals your plum wine. Fringe tidbit. Some women, sent into concubinage, would fake pregnancy using stuffed pillows and faked cravings trying to curry favor until they could secure better housing or actual affection. Historians still argue whether these acts were out of desperation strategy or sheer theatrical flair. For men, romance is easier to initiate but no less political. If you're the son of a merchant, you might sneak glances at a scholar's daughter during temple festivals, hoping she drops her fan. If she does, and you're brave, you return it with a line of borrowed verse. If her aunt sees you, you'll be explaining yourself to 5 uncles by sundown. Love letters are passed through go-betweens, servants, younger siblings, or extremely nosy neighbors. Poems are the preferred medium flowery vague and laden with seasonal metaphors. Our love is like autumn rain, could mean passion, sadness, or damp laundry. It depends on the calligraphy. But don't mistake passion for freedom. Elopements are rare and frowned upon. Divorce is possible but stigmatized unless the husband declares his wife unfilial jealous or too talkative. Yes, that's legal grounds. You consider writing a counter list, but fear it would reach 10,000 characters. A mainstream fact. During the Tang Dynasty, women of higher classes had relatively more autonomy. Some became poets, merchants, even Buddhist nuns with property. Love could bloom in those freer circles, though always within Confucian bounds. You once heard of a widow who refused to remarry, instead writing daily verses to her late husband. Her neighbors thought her mad. Also admirable. Your sister, meanwhile, is preparing for marriage. She's 16 and terrified. The match is good. He's a landowner's son. But she's only seen him twice, and once he had porridge on his chin. You help her pin her hair and whisper that porridge isn't permanent. Dread, however, can be. In rural villages, love is simpler but harsher. Couples meet at market fairs, exchange looks, maybe share a rice cake. If the parents approve, a matchmaker steps in. If they don't, it's whispered poetry and broken hearts for all. There are occasional stories of true love fishermen and weavers, scholars and courtesans, beggars and princesses. These tales are passed down like sacred scrolls, always ending in reunion or reincarnation. You cling to them like thread on silk, knowing your own life is more stitched than sung. Back in your courtyard, your husband snores through his midday nap. The first wife is composing a letter to her brother, possibly about you. You take a deep breath, adjust your sash, and return to your embroidery. Today, it's peonies, which symbolize wealth and love. You stitch slowly, deliberately, trying not to laugh. Because love in Imperial China might be tangled in obligation, rank, and duty. But every now and then, there's a moment, a glance, a poem, a plum wine shared under a mulberry tree, and that perhaps is enough. You wake to the scent of fried sesame and something sweet, possibly hope. Today is a festival day, and that means your usual routine of toil and survival is briefly interrupted by noise color and the very real chance of accidentally eating 4 desserts before lunch. The courtyard is already buzzing. Lanterns are being strung between the plum trees. Paper streamers unfurl from windows, and your youngest cousin is wearing a dragon mask and threatening the chickens. Somewhere a reed flute plays a wobbly tune that insists on being festive, whether the notes agree or not. You help your aunt stuff glutinous rice cakes with sweet bean paste. Your hands are sticky, the rice is aggressive, and half the cakes come out looking like collapsed dumplings, but no one cares. Festival food doesn't have to be pretty, just plentiful. The streets of Chang'an are alive. Vendors hawk candied fruits on sticks, smoked duck wings, roasted chestnuts, and a mysterious jelly that jiggles with unnerving confidence. You spot a troupe of actors preparing for a shadow puppet show. Behind them, a monk blesses passers-by with a feather fan and a very loud sneeze. Mainstream fact: the Tang Dynasty boasted some of the grandest festivals in Chinese history. The Lantern Festival marked the end of the New Year celebration, lighting up the entire capital with glowing orbs, riddles, and firecrackers. Even the emperor participated, sometimes disguised, wandering the streets to see his people up close, or to sneak extra dumplings. You follow your cousin to a riddle booth where slips of paper dangle from lanterns. Solve one, win a prize. You attempt one. What has a face but cannot smile? You guess my uncle. It's wrong. The answer is a mirror. You receive a pickle for effort. Food is everywhere. Sweet rice balls with molten centers. Fried dough twists dusted with sugar. Savory steamed buns filled with pork and green onions. You're full by mid-morning. But that doesn't stop you from trying the honey-glazed hawthorn slices. They stick to your teeth and your soul. A fringe tidbit: during the Ghost Festival, families would burn fake money paper houses and even paper servants to send to the spirit world. Some took it further, sending paper horses, paper food carts, and once allegedly a paper girlfriend for a lonely ghost bachelor. Historians still argue whether this was devotion or afterlife micromanagement. Children run through the streets with lanterns shaped like animals, fish rabbits, even phoenixes with flammable tail feathers. You help light one and nearly set your sleeve on fire. It's fine. Everyone claps. There's music, drums, flutes, and a zither being played by a boy who is clearly not thrilled to be here. Dancers in long red robes swirl in the market square, their sleeves flaring like silk wings. You watch transfixed until your grandmother drags you away to help with the shrine offerings. At the family altar, you light incense bow 3 times and place bowls of fruit and rice cakes as offerings. Your grandfather hums a chant while swatting away a chicken, attempting spiritual enlightenment via peaches. You whisper a wish for health, fortune, and perhaps fewer chores. The afternoon brings parades, lion dancers leaping through the crowd, their costumes snapping with movement. One dancer trips over a cabbage. Everyone cheers anyway. The emperor's parade, if it happens, is far away beyond the gated palaces. You pretend not to care, but part of you still strains to hear the distant beating of ceremonial drums. As the sun dips low, lanterns begin to glow, orange, red, gold. The city transforms into a sea of light. Shadows dance across tiled roofs, children chase glowing orbs, and somewhere in the distance, a couple exchanges secret glances over a bowl of noodles. You return home sticky-fingered and sleepy. The fire is lit, and your family gathers to share what's left of the feast. You gnaw on a candied walnut and listen to your uncle tell a ghost story for the 5th time this year. It's still terrifying. Especially the part where the ghost eats someone's rice cake and leaves a single footprint on the roof. But then, as always, the next day comes. The lanterns come down. The extra food is gone. You're back to kanji chores and your husband muttering about tax records in his sleep. Still, the memory of light lingers. A little sweetness, a little music. A reminder that even in a life of repetition, there are moments that shimmer, if only briefly. Today begins not with chores, but with a sneeze. Your grandmother claims it means someone's talking about you. Your cousin insists it's the spirits especially, since you skipped bowing at the family shrine last week. You silently vow to double your incense offerings. In Imperial China, daily life is soaked in superstition and folk beliefs. Your neighbor ties red strings around her infant's ankles to ward off demons. The shopkeeper across the lane refuses to open on even-numbered days. And you never walk through the center of a doorway. It's where ghosts like to linger. Your mother hangs a talisman over the lintel, inked with crimson calligraphy that looks like abstract chickens. It's meant to repel malevolent spirits, bad luck, and possibly nosy in-laws. Beneath it, garlic bulbs and bundles of mugwort sway gently in the breeze, adding flair and funk to the doorway. Mainstream fact, Taoist ritual, and popular belief permeated household practices. People used paper charms, chanting priests, geomantic arrangements, and even spirit mediums to protect against illness ghosts and unfortunate hair days. Medicine and magic were often indistinguishable. You're not feeling great, so you visit the neighborhood healer. She's 83, mostly blind, and smells like ginseng and judgment. She listens to your pulse, stares at your tongue, and concludes that your yin is sluggish. Her prescription: chrysanthemum tea, boiled pig's hoof, and chanting the goose returns to the pond 3 times while facing northeast. You drink the tea. You eat the hoof. You chant. Your cousin laughs until he steps on a nail. The healer says his yang was arrogant. Everyone nods solemnly. At the market, a man is selling charms shaped like turtles. They're supposed to prevent theft. Another stall sells dreamstones, painted pebbles you place under your pillow to ensure pleasant visions. You buy one. It smells like soap and confidence. Your uncle is consulting a fortune teller about the ideal date to dig a new well. The man arrives with a compass, a rooster feather, and a long list of taboos. No digging on Thursdays. No digging while facing west. Absolutely no digging if someone in the household had noodles for breakfast. You had noodles. Fringe tidbit: in some regions, people used spirit-blocking mirrors, small hexagonal objects hung above doorways to reflect evil. If your reflection looked weird, it meant a ghost was near. If the mirror cracked, the ghost was offended. Some villagers held mirror apology rituals. Yes, really. You help your aunt prepare charms for the kitchen god. She writes polite reports about the family's behavior. He's believed to fly up to heaven and snitch to the Jade Emperor. You consider bribing him with extra candied lotus root. Your cousin draws a mustache on the charm. He is promptly slapped. Superstition governs everything from medicine to marriage. If a baby is born during a thunderstorm, it must wear red socks for a year. If a dog barks at midnight, someone nearby is about to fall in love or fall ill. The line is blurry. Your friend brings over a talisman meant to repel nightmares. It features a rooster, a gourd, and a poem that doesn't quite rhyme. You hang it anyway. That night, you dream of flying pigs and a disapproving dragon. You consider it a success. Historians still argue whether these beliefs created cohesion or chaos. On one hand, they offered structure, comfort, and social rituals. On the other, they sometimes led to goat sacrifices and spontaneous rooftop shouting. There's also the matter of ghosts. Everyone believes in them. You avoid looking into mirrors at night. You never comb your hair after sundown. It's said to attract hungry spirits. You once yawned during a funeral and had to perform 3 counter yawns to avoid possession. Your neighbor's niece recently married a man who'd been dead for 6 months. It was a ghost marriage arranged to placate his spirit and secure a husband for the girl. She now shares her house with an empty chair and occasional cold breezes. At dusk, you light incense and bow to the ancestor tablets. You whisper a few words of thanks and apology, just in case. A rooster crows unnaturally at the wrong hour. Everyone pauses. You light another stick just in case. Superstition isn't a quirk here. It's the wallpaper of daily life, always present, often unnoticed, and surprisingly useful when you want to blame the weather on something more poetic than clouds. You climb into bed, clutching your dreamstone eyes, darting to the talisman above the door. You whisper the goose phrase for good measure. The night is quiet. The spirits, for now, are pleased. You're barely awake when you hear shouting in the street. Again. This time, it's not a merchant haggling or a rooster staging a coup. It's a public punishment, complete with gongs, banners, and that special kind of silence that falls when everyone suddenly remembers crime is bad. You peer over the courtyard wall. A man is kneeling on the ground, flanked by 2 grim-looking constables holding bamboo rods. His offense, stealing from a temple donation box. His punishment, a public flogging 30 strokes, and the enduring humiliation of being hit while your neighbors critique your posture. You wince with each thwack. The crowd does too sympathy discomfort. And let's be honest, a bit of morbid curiosity. Someone hands you a rice cake. You eat it while watching justice unfold. It feels wrong, but also very, very normal. Mainstream fact. Corporal punishment was common across imperial dynasties. The 5 penalties included tattooing, amputation, exile, forced labor, and death. Flogging with bamboo rods was standard for minor offenses. Public humiliation was part of the process. Punishment as spectacle. Your cousin once got 12 strokes for forging tax receipts. He still walks like a stiff tea kettle. He claims it was worth it. You're not so sure. You've seen worse. A few months ago, a man was sentenced to be paraded through the streets wearing a wooden kang, a massive neckstock shaped like a square table so large he couldn't feed himself. He depended on sympathetic strangers to drip kanji into his mouth. After a week, he started quoting poetry. Then he stopped. No one knows why. Fringe tidbit. Some crimes resulted in facial tattooing, characters inked onto the forehead to mark a thief or traitor. These weren't delicate tattoos. They were carved in with knives and soot. Historians still argue whether this deterred crime or just created a very grumpy subculture of reluctant calligraphy enthusiasts. You pass a justice board on the way to the market. It's covered in wooden plaques listing offenses and their punishments. Late taxes, 10 lashes, adultery, exile, sometimes worse. disrespecting elders, a formal apology, a slap and 3 hours cleaning the temple latrine. Women weren't spared either. Though sometimes punished privately, they could still face public disgrace, hair-shaving confinement, or forced labor. Your neighbor's daughter once cut her hair out of grief. Everyone assumed she'd committed a crime. The gossip alone nearly imploded the neighborhood. Executions are rare, but when they happen, it's dramatic. Officials wear red robes, crowds form, and the accused kneels in silence. The method depends on the crime: beheading for treason, hanging for desertion, and the most feared death by 1,000 cuts reserved for traitors and those who really annoyed someone important. You try not to think about it too much. Inside the court system, justice is often arbitrary. A good judge might spare a thief and scold a merchant. A corrupt one might fine you for sneezing in his direction. There are appeals on paper. In reality, bribes often speak louder than innocence. A local legend tells of a judge so wise, he once uncovered a plot by asking a chicken to peck at suspects. The guilty party panicked when the chicken ignored him. The case was closed. Justice served by poultry. You wonder if that method still holds up in appellate court. At home, minor punishments are handled domestically. Your grandmother used to swat you with a slipper for stealing sweet buns. Your uncle once made you kneel on a sack of dried beans for losing the family chopsticks. It hurt more than the flogging, mostly because the beans were old and passive-aggressive. You reflect on how punishment is meant to restore balance, not just punish, but remind. Shame is currency here. Public scorn is a sentence all its own. And yet, for all the harshness, there's an odd predictability to it. You know what to avoid, who not to offend, and which rules can be bent like warm noodles. You don't feel safe exactly, but you do feel informed. As night falls, you hear a distant shout. Someone's been caught urinating on a temple wall. There's a fine, of course, and mandatory shrine cleaning. You shake your head and turn back inside. In a world where tattoos can be sentences and chickens can be lie detectors, justice is both performance and reality. You bow to the family, shrine whisper a polite apology to the ancestors, and count your blessings. Today, at least, no one carved poetry into your forehead. Small victories. Your younger brother has been up since before dawn, hunched over a bamboo desk, lit by a flickering oil lamp. He's reciting lines from the Analects, each syllable crisp, deliberate, and haunted. Occasionally, he pauses to slap himself awake. This is what studying looks like in Imperial China: equal parts discipline, despair, and early onset back pain. You tiptoe past. You made the mistake of asking him a question yesterday and got a 3-minute lecture on the proper alignment of virtue and vowels. He hasn't smiled in weeks. Welcome to the Imperial examination system. If you're a male of a certain class, this is your fate: a life of study, memorization, and test taking, all in the vague hope of becoming an official. It's the original rat race. Only the rats wear robes and quote Confucius. Mainstream fact. The Chinese civil service exams were among the most rigorous in history. Candidates studied for decades, mastering a canon of Confucian texts. Passing the exams meant prestige, power, and a desk job that wouldn't break your spine. unless, of course, you collapsed from exhaustion first. Your cousin once studied so hard he forgot how to cook rice. He lived on pickled plums and regret. He passed the first level, then failed the second, 3 times. The exams are held in testing compounds, rows of tiny brick cubicles barely large enough to sit. Candidates are locked inside for up to 3 days, writing essays and poems, eating cold buns, and hoping not to faint from stress or chamber pot fumes. You once snuck into one of those cubicles. It was like a jail cell had an affair with a stationery shop. The air smelled like ink sweat and unfulfilled ambition. There were claw marks on the desk. You didn't ask. A fringe tidbit. Some students wore secret crib sheets sewn into their clothing, microcalligraphy masterpieces known as cheating vests. Authorities eventually caught on and implemented body searches. Historians still argue whether the crackdown improved meritocracy or simply boosted tailoring innovation. At home, studying consumes everything. Your brother eats beside his scrolls, dreams, and couplets, and practices brushstrokes until his fingers cramp. You offer him a pickled radish. He declines, quoting Mencius. You eat it anyway. Failure isn't just disappointing, it's costly. Families invest everything in their son's education: money, food, even family honor. A passed exam can lift generations from poverty. A failed one. Just more noodles and disappointment. You remember a neighbor who passed all 3 levels. He came home in a red robe garlanded in silk and was carried through the streets like a victorious general. Within weeks, he was transferred to a magistrate's post in the north, where he died of boredom and paperwork. The exams test more than knowledge. You must write essays in perfect literary form. You must pen poems on assigned topics, usually involving geese rivers and metaphors for sadness. You must demonstrate not only intelligence, but loyalty, restraint, and the ability to flatter the emperor without being too obvious. It's a tightrope act on parchment. You once tried your hand at poetry. Your aunt read it and wept. Not from emotion, just confusion. Girls officially aren't allowed to take the exams, but that doesn't stop some from studying anyway. In hushed tones, you hear of a woman who disguised herself as a man and passed the first level before being discovered. The punishment: expulsion, of course, and possibly marriage. Even for those who pass, the journey doesn't end. There's competition for appointments. There are politics, backstabbing, one-upmanship over brush quality, and yes, even imperial favoritism. Talent gets you noticed. Flattery gets you promoted. Fringe families sometimes hire ghostwriters, failed scholars who write essays for students in exchange for rice or socks. It's frowned upon, but common. Everyone's desperate. You watch your brother nod off mid-recitation, then jolt awake muttering something about filial piety. You tuck a blanket around him. He doesn't notice. Historians still argue whether the exam system was a beacon of fairness or a treadmill of madness. It certainly offered opportunity, but only if you could survive the mental marathon. You sit down and open one of his discarded books. The characters blur, ancient and stubborn. You manage 2 lines before your eyes glaze over. You decide to sweep the courtyard instead. It's easier and quieter. As the sun sets, your brother stands, stretches, and recites one last verse. He bows toward the ancestral shrine, lights a stick of incense, and returns to his desk. The lamp flickers, the ink flows, the dream lives on. Even if he fails again, at least he'll fail elegantly, in calligraphy. Rain hasn't fallen in weeks, and everyone's pretending not to notice. The air is dry, the crops are limp, and even the rooster has stopped crowing. You step outside to a sky smeared with yellow-gray clouds, as if someone forgot how to paint weather. The well is 3 scoops from empty, and your grandmother is rationing water like it's imperial wine. Drought is one of the empire's cruelest guests, uninvited, unmoved, and deeply inconvenient. By midday, the wind shifts and it brings more than dust. A messenger arrives in the village square, shouting news of rising grain prices and new relief taxes, which sound suspiciously like the regular taxes, only meaner. Your uncle curses, your cousin faints, and someone starts a rumor about cannibalism in the western provinces. Again, mainstream fact. Natural disasters in Imperial China, droughts, floods, locusts, often triggered social unrest. The mandate of heaven, which justified the emperor's rule, was thought to waver during such events. A bad harvest could be interpreted as divine disapproval. Some emperors panicked and offered public apologies. Others just raised taxes and crossed their fingers. You spend the afternoon digging ditches, hoping to channel runoff from a well that no longer exists. Your hands blister, your back aches, and the only moisture you encounter is from your own sweat. Then come the bandits. Not the dramatic sword-wielding kind, just hungry, desperate men who used to be farmers. They arrive quietly, slipping through the fields, at dusk, stealing grain firewood, or in one case, your neighbor's prized chicken. That bird was a local celebrity. Its disappearance is mourned with inappropriate solemnity. Fringe tidbit. During famines, some towns built stone granaries, hidden food caches guarded by talismans and community watchmen. In rare cases, these granaries were sealed with riddles or taboo curses to deter theft. Historians still argue whether the curses worked or if everyone just got too weak to lift the lid. Floods bring no mercy either. One year, the river burst its banks and swept away half the market stalls and 3 pickled radish vendors. The survivors rebuilt on stilts. You tried to sell floating rice balls. No one was impressed. Fires are the most sudden. Wooden buildings, thatched roofs, and tightly packed courtyards mean that one stray ember can turn your home into a candle. Everyone keeps a bucket of sand nearby. You also keep a jar of good luck charms. One of them may actually work. You remember the great storm of last autumn. Lightning struck the temple. The incense urn caught fire. The monk blamed impure thoughts. Your aunt blamed the monk. Neither explanation saved the roof. Government aid is inconsistent. Sometimes an official arrives with rice and sympathy. Other times he demands tribute and leaves on a palanquin stuffed with mooncakes. Your family received a bag of old millet and a lecture. You ate the millet. It tasted like guilt and gravel. The mandate of heaven looms over all of this. If the emperor rules wisely, the land prospers. If the skies rage, perhaps he has failed. You wonder if anyone tells him that. Probably not. One villager suggests a rain ritual. You all gather in the field, bang pots, chant ancient verses, and hang frogs upside down on bamboo sticks. It doesn't work. The frogs are unimpressed. But for a moment, there's laughter, shared absurdity, and the illusion of control. Your grandmother sprinkles ash along the threshold, muttering something about keeping out bad spirits and floodwater in that order. You nod. You don't argue with her, especially when she's holding a ladle. Historians still argue whether community rituals during disasters were genuine spiritual acts or just organized stress relief. Either way, you feel slightly better after the frog ceremony. When rain finally comes, it arrives at night. You wake to the sound of water pounding the tiles, the smell of damp earth, and your cousin shouting, "Put the buckets out," in his most heroic voice. You run barefoot into the courtyard, arms wide catching rain on your tongue. The buckets overflow. The goat slips in the mud. The chickens form a single soggy clump. It's chaos. It's glorious. The next day, the roads are muddy, the well is full, and your family makes dumplings in celebration. You eat until your fingers go numb. You've survived another disaster, until the next one. And when it comes, you'll do what your ancestors did: dig, chant, rebuild, and hope the frogs forgive you. It's midnight, and something's scratching in the granary. You freeze bowl of leftover rice halfway to your mouth. That sound again, scritch, scritch, soft but persistent. You grab a broom and tiptoe across the courtyard like a poorly disguised burglar. You nudge open the granary door and are greeted by two beady eyes and the smug silhouette of a rat standing on top of the rice sack like it owns the place. You sigh. Not again. In Imperial China, pests are part of the family. Rats, mice, fleas, lice, and the occasional overly curious snake all make themselves at home. You can't really get rid of them. You can only negotiate terms. Mainstream fact. While rats were universally seen as pests, other creatures, like cats, dogs, and crickets, had complex roles in Chinese households. Cats were prized for their rodent hunting skills, but also symbolized good fortune. Crickets, meanwhile, were caged, cherished, and sometimes trained for sport. Your family owns two cats. They do nothing. One sleeps on your uncle's robe and refuses to chase anything without an imperial edict. The other once stared at a mouse for 10 minutes, then walked away like it had better things to do. You feed them anyway, partly out of love, and partly because your grandmother insists they bring luck. There's also the dog, a lazy buck-toothed mutt named Scholar. He guards the gate by sleeping under it. Once a thief tripped over him. The thief apologized. The real stars, though, are the crickets. Your cousin keeps 3 in tiny bamboo cages. He feeds them fresh greens and hums to them every morning. One of them, Levi, chirps in perfect rhythm. The others are moody and refuse to perform unless they're given a sliver of carrot. Fringe tidbit. Cricket fighting was a legitimate pastime during certain dynasties, with nobles betting fortunes on battles between finely bred insects. Manuals were written on training regimens, diet, and breeding. Some enthusiasts claimed their crickets could recognize their voices. Historians still argue whether this was science affection or sheer madness. At night, the chirping fills your room, a kind of natural lullaby. You once took a cricket with you on a journey tucked in a padded gourd. It escaped during lunch and caused 3 noodles and 1 elderly man to leap from the table. Outside, pests continue their campaign. Fleas dance on your ankles. A cockroach sprints across the rice jar like it's being chased by destiny. Your aunt swats it with a sandal and mutters a prayer to the kitchen god. You help hang cedar branches by the doors they're supposed to repel insects. So is vinegar, if you splash it near thresholds. You try both. The insects send reinforcements. Still, not all critters are unwelcome. Swallows build nests under your eaves, and it's considered lucky. Spiders are left alone. They catch mosquitoes and are believed to bring letters from heaven. You greet one in the corner and politely ask it to focus on the west wall. Your grandmother tells stories of a rat who once saved a baby from fire by chewing through its bindings. That rat, she claims, was reincarnated as your uncle. You glance at your uncle. You don't disagree. Even livestock can become companions. The family pig, Minister Snout, once followed you to school and waited outside like an insultingly round guardian. When he was finally butchered for winter, you held a solemn dumpling vigil in his honor. Historians still argue whether these close relationships with animals were spiritual practical or simply the result of living in very tight quarters with very few entertainment options. You pour a little rice outside for the ghost of a lizard you once stepped on. It's tradition, or superstition, or maybe guilt. Either way, it feels right. The rat from earlier reappears dragging a seed. You lock eyes. You raise the broom. It stares, then turns and disappears into the shadows victorious. You lower the broom. It's too late to fight, too humid to care. You return to your mat listening to the soft chorus of crickets, the occasional squeak, and the cat snoring like a judge. Pets, pests, and everything in between. They're part of the household. They nibble your food, invade your dreams, and teach you patience in ways Confucius never could. You close your eyes and whisper, "Just don't eat the rice." The rat presumably winks from the rafters. Sleep doesn't come easily in Imperial China. Not when the floor is straw. The air is sticky, and someone in the next room is snoring like an ox with a grudge. But tonight, you're especially exhausted. Your hands ache from hauling water, your legs from chasing goats, and your soul from arguing about bean sprouts with your cousin. You lie on your mat, staring at the oiled paper window where moonlight filters through like softened silver. Somewhere outside, a cricket chirps, a solo answered by the distant hoot of an owl. The goat mercifully is quiet. You try to drift off, but your brain insists on listing tomorrow's tasks. Fetch firewood. Avoid the tuhos. Inspector, help prepare for yet another ancestor memorial. You sigh and shift position. The mat creaks. Your knee pops. You're officially aging. Mainstream fact. In traditional Chinese belief, dreams were not just idle nighttime fancies. They were meaningful, often prophetic. Some people kept dream diaries. Others visited temple diviners to interpret visions. Dreaming of fish meant wealth. Dreaming of teeth falling out. Bad news, especially if your real teeth were already wobbly. You try counting sheep. Then you remember that sheep in your village are loud, uncooperative, and prone to chewing the shrine curtains. You switch to counting scholars reciting the great learning. You get to 9 before one of them quotes Mencius incorrectly and ruins it. A fringe tidbit. Some Taoist monks practiced dream alchemy using lucid dreams to explore alternate realities or connect with spirits. There are even records of dream manuals advising practitioners on how to fly visit distant lands or seduce celestial maidens. Historians still argue whether these were metaphysical journeys or really ambitious naps. Your own dreams, when they finally arrive, are vivid and oddly specific. You're a duck herder in the afterlife. The ducks are sentient. One of them accuses you of stealing rice. You deny it. A rooster mediates. It's absurd. It's peaceful. It makes perfect sense in dream logic. But before you drift too far, your little sister whispers, "Do you think we'll be rich in our next life?" You murmur something like, "Only if I'm not married to a rice merchant again." She giggles, pulls the blanket over her head, and goes quiet. You reflect just briefly on reincarnation. The idea that after all this scrubbing, pots, dodging taxes, feeding lazy cats, you might return as someone else. Or something else. Maybe a noble. Maybe a poet. Maybe a wheel of tofu. There are worse fates. Historians still argue whether beliefs in karmic rebirth made people more patient or just quietly resigned. You suspect a little of both. When life gives you leaky roofs and public toilets, the idea of another round, hopefully improved, feels oddly comforting. You roll onto your side, eyes finally heavy. The noises of the courtyard fade, the rustle of silk, the thud of a bowl being set down, the ever-present murmurs of your aunt muttering blessings or insults in her sleep. Outside, the moon glows soft and enormous. A cloud drifts by like a slow-moving dumpling. Somewhere a lantern flickers out, and inside, amid the woven mats and slumbering chickens, you feel the strange serenity of being utterly humanly tired. Not tired like defeat, tired like completion, like you've lived one full, chaotic, peculiar day in the Empire, and somehow, despite vermin and vinegar and poetry-driven husbands, you've made it. You smile finally, just a little. The kind of smile that only sleep understands. Picture it now, before the rooster crows. You're already half-dressed in layered silk robes that feel more like drapery than clothing, balancing a lacquered tablet under one arm, and praying that today's imperial mood swings don't land on you. The palace looms over you, carved in stone and heavy with silence. You step softly on mosaic floors meant only for officials of your rank, careful not to tread even a hair too close to the Forbidden City's inner court gates. That's for senior ministers. You're a minor functionary in the Ministry of Rights, a glorified paper pusher. And yet, you know with startling clarity that one wrong phrase on a scroll, or a bow, too shallow by an inch, could end with you out of a job or worse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And what time is it over there? You start your morning not with coffee, but with ceremonial tea, bitter precise, poured from a spouted pot into a porcelain cup so small it makes espresso look indulgent. You sip carefully as incense curls upward in a long hall whose walls are covered with intricate scenes of tigers and phoenixes, none of which make your stomach less uneasy. Because today might be the day, even though you've memorized your script. Yes, there's a script you rehearse your morning lines again, just in case. 10,000 blessings to the Son of Heaven, you mutter under your breath, along with 12 other honorifics you're expected to deliver should you accidentally cross paths with someone titled. But mostly, you keep your head down and walk in single file behind a half-dozen other men dressed almost identically. Your rank is embroidered on your chest in silk thread and egret, if you're lucky. If you've been recently demoted, maybe just a goose. There's a strange tranquility to mornings like this, the kind where the palace seems to exhale. and a quiet sigh filled only with the swish of silk and the distant clang of temple bells. You imagine how absurd this all would seem to someone from the future. All this theater, all this dread. But here, status is everything. Even the wind seems to change direction depending on who's speaking. As you pass the outer garden chrysanthemums in full bloom, you give a polite nod to a eunuch stationed by the bamboo screens. He's been there longer than anyone remembers. Rumor has it he's memorized the entire book of documents just to kill time. Inside the clerical chamber, you take your place. Scrolls await you. Names, ranks, marriage petitions, ceremonial errors to be reviewed. But before you can unroll even one document, there's a cough from the assistant registrar. Everyone freezes. He's not a man prone to illness. No. This is the cough of subtle announcement. Someone is coming. You lower your eyes reflexively. It's the vice minister, known for his fondness for strict punctuality and punishing minor errors with terrifying glee. He glides into the room like a man who's never been rushed a day in his life, his robes trailing behind him like storm clouds. You keep your head slightly bowed, but not too low. That would look suspicious. You hear him pause near your desk. He murmurs, flipping a scroll at random. Your breath catches. This could be a scroll you drafted. One with the imperial hunting dates, or worse, the music schedule for the Empress's moon banquet. His fingers tap. Once, twice, and then mercifully he moves on. Still, your heart doesn't slow for another hour. This is your life now, navigating a jungle of etiquette protocol and ambiguous facial expressions. Every word you write could be a trap. Every gesture must be calibrated. Smile too widely, and you're seen as naive. Smile too little, and you're arrogant. It's an entire language of fear and formality. Historians still argue whether the constant surveillance was more psychological than real, but you know better. Spies don't wear masks. They wear friendly smiles and memorize who forgot to compliment the minister's poetry last week. By noon, you've already triple-checked every memo, had one colleague burst into tears quietly after misquoting a Confucian aphorism, and watched the underscribe bribe a tea boy with candied lotus to make sure he wasn't skipped during the afternoon incense offering. It's exhausting, and yet utterly inescapable, because getting this job, that was the easy part, staying in it. That's where the real nightmare begins. Let's talk about the robes. You'd think wearing silk every day would feel luxurious. It doesn't. Not when it's regulated down to the stitch count. Your outer robe, stiff with embroidery, broadcasts your official rank to everyone, even passing pigeons. The bird on your chest isn't ornamental. It's practically a resume. Egrets cranes, ducks each species says something about your bureaucratic station. Heaven forbid you ever wear the wrong one. The moment you walk into the morning assembly, you feel every pair of eyes tracing the iconography on your chest, like auditors scanning a tax return. One misplaced thread could be interpreted as delusion or worse, ambition. And ambition is dangerous here. At court, status isn't just visual, it's spatial. Your desk must sit no closer than 3 body lengths from the senior officials. When standing, your hands must fold in the approved resting pose. Fingers neither too stiff nor too relaxed. Even your bow must arc at exactly the right angle. Too shallow suggests pride, too deep implies sarcasm. And everyone is watching. This constant vigilance breeds a unique flavor of paranoia. You begin second-guessing everything. Did you bow too slowly? Did you pause long enough before answering? The undersecretary. Were you supposed to speak third in line or fourth? Historians still debate how much these subtle behaviors truly mattered. But in your bones, you know the truth. They mattered enough to get a man reassigned to goat counting in Yunnan. There's an unspoken game of optics unfolding around you at all times. One of your peers has taken to strategically coughing during your presentations, always at a key phrase. He's subtly undermining your authority while pretending to have seasonal allergies. You try to ignore it. That's what the vice minister would want. But another colleague notices, and now he thinks you're weak. You hear stories. The man who was demoted for laughing too loudly at a poem. The one who was accused of impersonating a higher rank because his ink brush was too fine. The archivist who tripped during a procession and was forced to write public apologies in 7 calligraphy styles. The line between minor embarrassment and career-ending scandal is thinner than rice paper. And then there are the feasts. You'd think dinner with your peers would offer some reprieve. It doesn't. Even that is a test. You must toast the right person first, laugh at the right joke, avoid eating more than your superior, and always, always leave exactly 1 dumpling on your plate. It shows restraint. Eat everything and you're greedy. Leave too much and you're wasteful. It's a culinary tightrope walked with chopsticks. And heaven help you if you accidentally spill anything on your robes. That's not just clumsy, that's symbolic. A soiled official robe says you're messy with details or your soul. No one will say it out loud. They'll just take longer to return your greetings the next morning. You start dreaming in etiquette codes. You wake up mid-bow. Your wife tells you you've started mumbling rank titles in your sleep. You believe her. It's not just exhausting, it's isolating. Everyone's a potential rival. And allies. They're rare, fragile things. You once trusted a senior clerk with a harmless anecdote about misfiling a grain ledger. The next week, the Minister of Agriculture started calling you Mr. Overflow with a little too much amusement. You stop trusting the tea servers. You start writing drafts in invisible ink. You hoard scrolls like secrets, double knotting the ribbons. It's no wonder that in later dynasties, some reforms tried to simplify court attire and reduce rank confusion. Historians still argue whether it helped, but you know it never reached the roots of the problem. Because the issue isn't the clothes. It's that everyone is terrified of being seen doing the wrong thing. And no one ever tells you what that is until it's too late. So how exactly did you end up here waking at dawn to silence your own footsteps, memorizing tea temperatures, and living in fear of silk-embroidered birds? It all started with the exams. The dreaded, mythologized, mind-mangling Imperial Civil Service exams. If you're lucky, you pass them. Or rather, you survived them. They weren't tests so much as endurance trials wrapped in poetry and Confucian doctrine. Imagine being locked in a tiny stone cell. Yes, cell, for 3 straight days. Scribbling essays on filial piety, historical metaphors, and the correct way to phrase an imperial tax adjustment. No food delivery, No help. Just you, ink, and a prayer that your metaphors didn't accidentally insult a royal ancestor. And even if you did everything right, beautiful brushwork, flawless structure, correctly attributed quotes from the Analects, your score still depended on whether your examiner had a grudge that day or whether your handwriting reminded him of his cousin. Historians still argue whether these exams were meritocratic or just a clever filter for those willing to suffer politely. Let's say you weren't the exam type. Then, how did you land the job? Option 2, patronage. Maybe your uncle knew a man who once shared a hot spring with a low-tier prince. Or perhaps your cousin married into a bureaucrat's family and they owed a favor. That favor turned into a clerkship in the Ministry of Weights and Measures. It all sounds helpful until your patrons fall from grace, which they always do. You, with your neatly folded recommendation letters and gratitude baked into your spine, suddenly find yourself in the awkward position of having a badge you didn't entirely earn. And everyone knows it. There's also option 3, volunteering during a crisis. Let's say a flood hit the southern rice basin. You showed up with a shovel, handed out millet, and shouted, "Long live the emperor," at the right moment. A magistrate noticed. You were given a role, not prestigious, but real. The problem: once the crisis passed, your value evaporated. You were seen as a temporary helper, no real connections, disposable. Regardless of how you got here, the realization hits hard and fast. The job is nothing like what you imagined. There are no sweeping reforms, no elegant policy writing, no heroic displays of justice. Most of your day is spent copying regulations written 4 reigns ago and signing scrolls with the brush equivalent of "Yes, I read this." And when you finally do get to make a decision, say authorizing a canal repair or approving a trade shipment, you'll be criticized from all sides. Did you consult the local elders? Why did you not refer to the precedent set in the winter decrees of 1402? Why was the wax seal 2 shades too dark? Soon you long for the exam cells. At least their failure was private. Now failure is public. You begin to understand the strange behaviors of your colleagues, why the assistant registrar refuses to speak above a whisper, why the older scribe carries a spare inkstone so he's never caught unprepared, why one official insists on reciting old poems before meetings, not out of romance, but because a former minister once praised them. And praise is armor. Your own habits shift. You stop eating lunch with others. You only drink water you've poured yourself. You rehearse your signature 3 times before sealing anything. Your writing style gets shorter, safer. The sparkle you once had, the one that got you noticed during your uncle's dinner party, gone. Because sparkle draws attention, and in this job, attention gets you fired. It's afternoon now, and you're back at your desk, staring at a bamboo slip covered in corrections. You wrote a tribute poem for the Crown Prince's birthday. Technically optional, but expected. Unfortunately, the word you chose for radiance can also be read as glare, and the Palace Poetry Bureau has flagged it. You correct the offending phrase, but the damage is done. Your name is now on a list. Not a blacklist, not yet, but a watch list. The sort of list that means your documents are reviewed more slowly. Your pay is processed with mysterious delays and your invitations to ministry dinners stop arriving. You feel the eyes on you. Colleagues whisper softer when you enter a room. The eunuch who used to bring your tea with a polite nod now sets it down wordlessly and walks away before you can thank him. And still, the paperwork flows in. Imperial edicts arrive wrapped in yellow silk. You're not allowed to open them. You're not senior enough. But you must process the documentation that follows. Appointment, confirmations, grain tallies, ceremonial seating charts. A mistake in any of these can mean catastrophe. Take the music registry. For an upcoming ceremony, you're tasked with listing the correct sequence of instruments for a Confucian ritual orchestra. Flutes, zithers, bells, drums, all must be listed in order of pitch and cultural hierarchy. Misplace a bell, and you're seen so as culturally illiterate. Switch two zithers, and you've insulted tradition. And the worst part, you're not entirely sure what counts as correct. Historians still argue whether some of these tasks had actual guidelines or were intentionally left vague to test obedience over accuracy. All you know is that your nerves thrum like those zithers stretched too tight across the frame. Meanwhile, the vice minister sends you a memo. Just one line. Review attached figures. Consider implications. No signature. No seal. It's about the palace peacock allotment. Yes, that's a real thing. Too many peacocks means extravagance. Too few, and it's disrespectful during court rituals. There's a handwritten note in the margin, presumably from his assistant, double-check tail feather counts. You blink. This isn't a joke. You spend 3 hours reading prior peacock orders from 3 dynasties ago, trying to determine what implications even means. Eventually, you copy the memo, carefully. Add your cautious commentary, subject to supply availability and ritual necessity adjustment, not advised, and seal it with trembling fingers. You deliver it yourself, hands dry with panic. Outside the vice minister's quarters, a wooden plaque hangs from the door with the character for stillness. It's both aesthetic and threatening. You knock once, twice. No answer. You leave the scroll in the designated basket and back away slowly. On your return, the hall seems quieter. Too quiet. You see 2 clerks you recognize, men who used to greet you by name, turn their backs as you approach. One even slides his scroll out of view. This is how it begins. Paranoia is no longer just a side effect. It becomes your primary mode of operation. You reread every document before sealing. You test the ink on scrap paper to avoid blots. You double-space ceremonial names to avoid accidental cramping, which can be read as disrespect. You stop speaking casually in meetings. Your laughter becomes measured, almost choreographed. You decline plum wine at banquets. You even adjust how you walk. No longer first in line, never last, always second or third. Still, the dread remains. The fear that somewhere something you wrote is being misread, or worse, read correctly by someone who sees danger in your every comma. Because, here's the truth, you don't need to commit a crime to be punished. You just need to write an awkward phrase, or suggest the wrong timing for a dragon parade, or recommend an unpopular official for promotion. One slip, one scroll, and your career ends not with a bang, but a politely phrased reprimand that means start packing. You've heard the rumors, but today you see it for yourself. It happens during the midday break, just as the bronze gongs echo through the ministry courtyard. You're halfway through a bowl of millet porridge when you hear muffled footsteps, too many too fast. You look up. 4 guards appear, not palace soldiers, but internal enforcers, quiet men with no insignias and tight expressions. Behind them, the chief scribe trails like a bad omen holding a sealed scroll. Everyone in the courtyard pretends not to watch, but everyone watches. They stop in front of Assistant Director Lin, a decent man, a man who once loaned you ink and never asked for repayment. The scribe hands him the scroll. Lin opens it. You see his shoulders twitch. Then he bows deeply, hands shaking, and is escorted away without a word. No one says a thing for the next hour. No one asks. But by sunset, you know the story. Lin suggested that the spring equinox sacrifices could be moved back 3 days to accommodate a predicted storm. His logic civic safety and food preservation. But tradition dictated that the sacrifice be held on the second morning after the solar midpoint. Suggesting otherwise wasn't just a procedural blunder, it was read as a challenge to celestial harmony. And to challenge harmony is to challenge the emperor. You stop eating millet for the next 3 days. It just doesn't sit right. You start to look over your own memos again, just in case. And now you see them, the men who no longer greet you, the ones who shift their scrolls subtly whenever you pass. Spies. Possibly. Or maybe just bureaucrats like you trying to avoid guilt by association. Either way, it hurts. Your supervisor, Master Fang, hasn't spoken to you in 3 days. When you pass his office, the bamboo screen is down. You wonder if he's already planning how to distance himself, maybe drafting a scroll, stating he never trained you, maybe reassigning you to a meaningless task like candle census verification. That's how it usually starts. You once read a document from 50 years ago about a clerk who'd forgotten to deliver a minor scroll to the Ministry of Rites. The oversight was discovered when the palace musicians arrived on the wrong day. That clerk was reassigned to pond maintenance in winter. Historians later argued it was accidental exile, but the effect was the same, and the pond froze. Now, you begin to notice coded language in internal memos. Phrases like under further observation or procedural deviations or the ominous awaiting review. These aren't just bureaucratic filler, they're red flags. You start to see that reputation here is currency, but negative reputation is an infection, and it's contagious. So what do? You stop making suggestions entirely. You begin to quote Confucius in every report. You copy phrases from older approved documents. Your opinions shrink, then vanish. Your language becomes safer than boiled cabbage. Dry, bland, and utterly non-threatening. It works for a while, until a tiny slip. You forget to mention a senior official's full title in a report. Instead of His Excellency Deputy Overseer of Silk Tributaries, you simply wrote Deputy Overseer. It was a busy day. You were tired, but someone noticed. The memo returns with a quiet stamp in red omission of due reverence. You can't breathe. You sit still for 10 minutes holding the paper as if doing so might reverse the ink. You write an apology scroll. You deliver it personally, hands trembling, voice even. The official you offended smiles slightly, says nothing. You bow twice, then you leave, and wait. The next day, your name is not on the ceremony roster. It's a subtle removal, but you feel it like a kick to the ribs. You've been downgraded. No announcement, just fewer responsibilities, fewer scrolls, a change in seating, a longer delay in your food rations. It's how a man begins to vanish at court. Historians still argue whether such ostracism was deliberate or just the result of institutional inertia. But when you're living it, there's no debate. You're watching your own shadow fade from the marble floors. You receive the scroll at dawn, a crimson ribbon, black lacquered seal, heavy parchment scented faintly with sandalwood and bureaucratic dread. It's not from your ministry. It's from the censorate, an elite watchdog branch with one job: rooting out corruption, disloyalty, and improper behavior among officials. They're not interested in context. They're interested in appearances, and yours, apparently, has raised a brow or two. The scroll is worded politely. Too politely. It states that one of your recent memoranda displayed insufficient reverence for ceremonial precision. You're not directly accused of wrongdoing yet, but the phrase, to be re-examined for fitness of post, carries the weight of a tombstone. You've seen this before. First a subtle rebuke, then a forced transfer. And then, if things go really badly, a final edict stripping you of your title, your robe, your income, and your dignity. If you're lucky, you get to retire to your family estate. If you're unlucky, you're sent to exile. And if the emperor is in a particularly philosophical mood, perhaps you'll be invited to take your own life gracefully. You remember the story of Vice Minister Duan, a small seal error on a military dispatch. He was demoted, exiled, and reportedly froze to death cataloging tax records in a Mongolian outpost. All over a seal, so you panic. You reread every memo you've sent in the last 6 months. You cross-reference names, titles, poetry quotes. You even ask the scribe next to you quietly if he remembers anything odd you might have said. He shrugs. And that's when the real danger becomes clear. Nobody wants to help someone under review. You're toxic now, and it doesn't take much. Case after case in the historical records shows how swiftly dismissal could fall. One scholar in the Tang Dynasty cited the wrong dynastic precedent in a temple renovation petition. He was dismissed within 3 days. Another simply declined to host a banquet for a visiting inspector. That lapse in hospitality was reinterpreted as sedition. Historians still argue whether the rules were that strict or whether officials simply weaponized bureaucracy to settle personal scores. You know what it feels like from the inside, terrifyingly arbitrary. You consider writing a preemptive apology scroll. Not an admission of guilt, just a polite clarification. But there's risk in that too. Apologizing implies fault. And if your explanation missteps, you'll confirm their suspicions. So you wait. Days pass. You're not summoned, but you're not assigned new work either. Your desk sits suspiciously empty. The clerks pretend you don't exist. The eunuchs stop delivering tea. And then it happens. You're summoned to the Hall of Judicial Petitions. This is no ordinary office. It's the room where disciplinary decisions are read out loud sometimes in front of other officials. You dress carefully. plain robes, modest hairpin. You skip breakfast because your stomach is coiled too tightly to hold anything. Inside the hall, the magistrate reads from a scroll. Your infraction negligent phraseology in matters of ritual significance. Your consequence reassignment to provincial oversight duties. Indefinite duration. Translation exile. Not full banishment, but a transfer to a post so remote it might as well be Siberia. You'll oversee river trade records in a cold, rain-sodden county with no library and a governor who sleeps through audits. Your career is over. They don't call it a firing. That would be dishonorable. Instead, they call it reassignment for spiritual clarity and administrative reflection. You bow, accept the seal, and walk out of the hall into what feels like a different world. The palace garden looks the same lotus blossoms, same gilded finches, but the air is thicker now. You've been branded. No one looks at you as you pack your writing tools. No one says goodbye. You're erased quietly, the way most officials are. The ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow morning, third bell. You're not being executed technically. You're not even being tried, but you are being paraded. Dismissals in Imperial China could be quiet, secret, a simple scroll in a cold journey into obscurity. But when the court needed to send a message, when fear needed to be sown into the hearts of still employed men, they made a show of it. And you apparently are today's lesson. They call it a public reprimand ceremony. Harmless in name, devastating in effect. It starts with a bath, not a refreshing one. This is ritual cleansing cold water, brisk scrubbing by low-ranking attendants, and a change of robes. Not your robes, of course. You're stripped of your insignia, your hair ornaments, your personalized inkstone. Instead, you're given a plain hemp tunic, one that says this person is no longer someone. Then there's the walk. You're led through the central corridor of the ministry complex where you used to deliver scrolls, nod politely, whisper inside jokes with the accounting staff. Now those same people keep their eyes glued to their desks. One clerk fumbles her brush. Another pretends to reread a report he already stamped. Even the eunuchs are silent. Your escort is quiet too. Two younger guards with pale expressions. They don't look at you. They've seen this before. They know not to speak, not to feel. Just walk. You arrive at the Hall of Petitions again. This time, there's an audience. Fellow officials arranged by rank. The chief secretary reads the document aloud. On the matter of procedural impropriety, deliberate deviation from customary reverence, reassignment to Yanzhou for indefinite penance, no mention of your years of service, no record of your accomplishments. The tone is flat, measured, the way one might describe a spoiled shipment of rice. Then comes the worst part, the cymbals. A single clang, loud, jarring. It's ceremonial a way to mark the end of an official's service. Once for each person being dismissed. You get one, and that's it. No words of farewell. No comforting hand on your shoulder. Just the faint echo of metal and the scratch of sandals against stone as you're let out. Dismissal ceremonies weren't always like this. Historians still argue about when the pageantry began. Some say during the Tang Dynasty, when Confucian orthodoxy took a theatrical turn. Others believe it started as a courtly punishment prank during the Yuan. But you think it's always been about fear. Because the true punishment isn't exile, it's humiliation. The system doesn't just remove you, it teaches others to remove themselves from you. That's why even your closest friend Wei, who once shared dried persimmons with you behind the ledger stacks, avoids your eye. You understand, but it still stings. Afterward, you're left alone in your quarters. Your personal effects are boxed under supervision. No letters, no ink, not even your poetry scrolls. All returned at a later date which never comes. You sit for hours staring at the single oil lamp they've left you. You used to belong here. Now the silence feels pointed, like the palace itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to vanish. And tomorrow you will. You decide to try the only move left to a man in your position: resignation. Not all dismissals are forced. Some officials, sensing their end before it fully arrives, submit what's called a letter of voluntary withdrawal, a finely worded farewell designed to sound noble, sorrowful, and entirely their idea. You spend the evening crafting yours. The brush glides carefully over parchment as you compose something poetic, yet harmless. You cite declining health, diminished clarity of mind, and a humble wish to serve the empire through quiet reflection. You don't mention fear. You don't mention mistakes. You quote Confucius twice. Add a metaphor about withering lotuses. Fold it neatly. Attach your seal. And wait. The next morning, your resignation is denied. The response scroll is brief. Request not accepted. Reassignment remains in effect. No explanation. No pleasantries. This is not a misunderstanding. It's a signal. The palace has no interest in your graceful exit because resignation implies control. It lets you shape your ending. And right now, the empire wants your ending to look like a warning. You're not the first to learn this the hard way. Decades ago, a renowned calligrapher named Jin Yu submitted his resignation after rumors swirled about minor corruption. He framed it as retirement, even offered to donate his salary back to the treasury. The court published his letter in the State Gazette, then added a footnote clarifying he was under investigation and would be detained for further questioning. He died in confinement 3 months later. Historians still argue whether Jin Yu's crime was financial or merely political. But every scholar agrees on this. Once the court had you in its grip, there was no graceful escape. Still, some try. A lesser-known tactic is the honorable demotion, where an official requests a posting in a rural temple town, citing a wish for spiritual cleansing. The idea is to retreat before being pushed, to vanish on your own terms. You draft a second letter humbler than the first. This time, you request a voluntary post at a monastery in the Western Hills, citing a deep yearning for clarity. You quote a Zen proverb. You even mention a dream you once had of a willow bending with the wind. You wait 2 days. No reply. On the third day, the ministry sends your formal travel orders to Yanzhou. No mention of temples, just a date, a route, and an escort. Your fate is sealed. You begin to pack what little you're allowed. 1 pair of robes, no scrolls, no personal inkstones, not even your collection of dried plum blossoms. They'll be processed by the ministry's document archive, which is a kind way of saying they'll be stored lost or quietly destroyed. The guards assigned to accompany you are polite but silent. One hands you a wrapped rice ball before departure. You thank him. He says nothing. And as you walk toward the gate, something strange happens. You feel light, not joyful, but no longer crushed. Because the weight of survival, of watching every word, every blink, every ceremonial cup, is slipping off your shoulders with each step. The palace shrinks behind you. Its curved roofs no longer loom. The stairs fade. The whispers vanish. There's freedom, oddly, in having nothing left to lose. You pass the outer walls and feel the wind again. Real wind, not the suffocated breeze inside courtyards. A temple bell sounds in the distance, and though you're headed into obscurity, you realize one thing. For the first time in years, no one expects anything from you. You arrive in Yanzhou after 17 days of bumpy sedan rides, icy river crossings, and a number of uncomfortable lodgings that make you nostalgic for the drafty archive room back in the capital. It's damp here. Everything smells like cold stone and boiled cabbage. The local magistrate greets you with a smile that says, "Please don't cause me any problems." You're given a small room behind the granary and a new assignment: oversee grain transfer records between two nearby storage towns. A job so dull, even the rats seem bored. Your title now: Provisional Document Overseer, Third Class Temporary. It sounds almost like a job. It's not. Your first day starts in a musty pavilion with leaky roof tiles and ink that takes hours to dry. The clerks under you treat you with the polite pity usually reserved for widowers or men who lose at dice. You're given old scrolls to review, most from last year, some from the year before. The records are filled with errors, none of them dangerous. You fix them anyway. Not because anyone will notice, but because doing nothing would feel worse. There's no ceremony here, no intricate tea service, no embroidered robes. Just patched tunics and bowls of rice porridge thickened with sweet potato peelings. The local constables don't know your former title and don't care. You're just another scribe to them, though, one who refuses to eat pickled radish and insists on quoting the Book of Rites during lunch breaks. Sometimes they tease you. Sometimes you laugh. Your nights are long. You write poems in your head, whisper them aloud into the drafty corners of your room. They're about silence mostly, about how soft the wind feels when no one expects you to bow to it. One evening, you receive a letter. You don't recognize the script at first. It's from Wei, your old colleague. Somehow, he smuggled it past the censors. It's brief, just 4 lines. They cleared your name at court. The vice minister was censured for overreach. No formal apology will come. But I still remember your kindness. You reread it until the corners soften. It changes nothing, really. You won't be summoned back. The palace doesn't reverse decisions. It simply stops talking about them. Historians still argue whether exiled officials were ever truly meant to return, or if their function was symbolic to show that even learned men could be undone by ink and timing. Still, the letter means something. You pin it beside your bed. From that day on, your walks through the village feel different. The locals wave now. You start learning names: the fishmonger's daughter, with the laugh like a bell; the old man who insists the mountain nearby looks like a sleeping ox. You learn to sleep through rooster calls and to appreciate the strange local dish of pickled pears and garlic. You even take on a student barely literate, curious, eager. You teach him how to hold a brush. He teaches you how to catch crickets with a blade of grass. This is not the life you trained for, but it is somehow a life. And when another letter arrives, months later, this one stamped with the seal of the Ministry of Personnel, offering you a reviewed and reduced penalty with options for future reinstatement, you fold it quietly and place it in a box. You don't respond. Because reinstatement means returning to that world of silent battles and ceremonial panic. And here, among crooked scrolls and crooked teeth, you have something rarer than rank. You have peace. But not everyone sent away to the provinces finds peace. For many, dismissal was simply the beginning of the end. In the Empire's eyes, losing face was more than personal embarrassment. It was moral failure. If your removal implied disloyalty or error, you weren't just demoted, you were disgraced. And disgrace in Imperial China had an afterlife of its own. Some officials were given the honor of choosing their exit, a euphemism, of course. You'd heard the phrase before, invited to contemplate in solitude. A polite way of saying, write a final poem, burn some incense, drink the wine, and take your own life before someone else does it less poetically. One such case haunted you even before your own downfall. Minister Gao, a high-ranking education official, accused of altering the registry of successful exam candidates to favor his nephew. Whether true or not, the accusation spread fast. Gao was never formally charged. Instead, he received a letter, beautifully brushed, urging spiritual resolution in service of celestial harmony. He was found the next morning, seated at his desk, robe folded, inkstone cleaned. His final calligraphy read, "Better to bend and break than rot upright." It's rumored the emperor wept when he read it, but the policy stayed. In more brutal cases, exile meant something far colder, literally. Some provinces assigned for re-education were near the empire's northernmost frontiers, where winters bit through layered robes and paper-thin walls. Snow leaked through thatched roofs. The only ink that flowed was frozen by morning. One former tax inspector sent north to Heilongjiang survived only 3 weeks before dying of exposure. Another collapsed from malnutrition while inspecting barley yields. Their deaths were recorded as natural, but everyone knew what killed them: bureaucratic frostbite. And some weren't even allowed exile. They were executed, though not in the garish style you might imagine. Not beheadings or floggings in the public square. These were formal, clean, and quiet, a sealed order, a cup of wine, sometimes a silk cord. The most gracious method was said to be a concoction of lotus and arsenic administered in private. Historians still debate the scale of these quiet terminations. Were they frequent or just infamous? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, sparse but chilling enough to keep the entire bureaucracy obedient. Because fear wasn't incidental, it was strategic. The imperial system didn't need to punish every mistake. It only needed to punish a few thoroughly, dramatically, and above all, publicly. And it worked. Even now, years after your own reassignment, you wake sometimes in a sweat. Not from nightmares of poverty or physical pain, but from dreams of summons, a new edict, a reopened file, a forgotten memo with your name miswritten, and the judgment that follows. But there's something else too. A memory that still haunts you more than the fear. The face of a junior clerk named Ren. He was your assistant briefly. Bright, overly eager, with a bad habit of asking too many questions. You warned him gently to speak less and listen more. One day, he corrected a senior officer's mistake in a tax scroll. Not rudely, not publicly, just a quiet annotation in red ink. 3 days later, he was gone. You never learned why. No announcement, no scroll, just an empty desk. And that perhaps was the cruelest part of the system, the way it could erase not just careers, but names. The way it demanded silence as much as obedience. Still, you remember him. And now, in your little village office, with its cracked ink pots and squeaky doors, you make sure to listen when your student speaks. You don't correct his misquotes too harshly. You let him ask foolish questions. Because you know it's not the mistake that kills you. It's when someone else decides to notice. You'd think your punishment ends with you. It doesn't. In Imperial China, being dismissed wasn't just a personal disgrace. It was contagious. Like a shadow cast over your entire family, stretching into their futures, dimming their prospects before they even understood why. The Empire didn't need to imprison your wife or confiscate your son's books to punish them. It could do far worse, quietly shrink their possibilities. It began with social visits, or rather, the lack of them. Overnight, your household became an empty courtyard. Neighbors who once joined your tea circles now crossed the street to avoid you. The grocer ran out of your favorite fish sauce. The candle maker sent your children home with wax stubs instead of fresh tapers. Your wife, once respected for her embroidery and soft-spoken wit, suddenly found herself uninvited to temple readings. When she walked through the market, vendors smiled too tightly. No one wanted to offend her, but no one wanted to be seen favoring her either. Even her hairdresser, a woman who'd trimmed her bangs for 10 years, stopped coming. You tried to shield her from the worst of it. You told her it was temporary, but she wasn't naive. She stopped wearing her formal robes, stopped using the gold hairpins gifted at your promotion. In the evenings, she quietly folded your remaining scrolls, wrapped them in cloth, and tucked them away in the chest you never opened anymore. Your eldest son, Li, had just begun studying for the exams. Bright, meticulous, prone to overusing metaphors in essays. Now, his tutor drops him. Not due to your family's status, the letter reads, but due to scheduling conflicts. Of course. He asks you one night, "Should I stop writing?" "Father," you lie. You tell him no. But deep down, you wonder, would it hurt less if he did? Your daughter's matchmaking prospects take a hit too. 3 arrangements vanish without explanation. Families suddenly decide to pursue simpler lives or claim bad omens in the stars. One even moves provinces. You don't blame them. The imperial system had a long memory, and the nobility feared its gaze. Being related to a dismissed official meant your household was suspect. It didn't matter how unjust the dismissal was. What mattered was the stain, and stains in Confucian society could be hereditary. One imperial decree from the Tang era stated plainly, "Let not the offspring of the disloyal ascend in office for 3 generations." Some dynasties enforced it, others ignored it. But the threat lingered century after century. Historians still argue whether these family penalties were official policy or just unwritten social codes. But in practice, it made no difference. The result was the same. You fell, and they fell with you. Your wife's brother writes from the capital, cautious, kind but distant. He says, "We must be careful now. I hope you understand." He ends the letter with a postscript about weather. You understand. And in your quiet hours, sitting beside your cold writing desk, you think back to a tale once told to you in the palace, a joke back then. A minister was dismissed, and the next day, even his family's ancestral shrine was relocated by order of the county priest. Bad luck had to be moved physically. That's how deep it ran. You never laughed at that story, not even then. Now, in your own exile, you try to build something for your children that doesn't rely on court titles. You teach your son to bind books. You teach your daughter to spot dishonesty in merchant contracts. You teach them how to smile at people who frown at them. And one day, your daughter comes back from the market holding a pouch of candied ginger. "The tea seller gave it to me," she says. "Said he remembered your old poems." You blink. A tiny sugared rebellion against silence. And you realize even shadows can thin over time. Eventually, you learn the secret truth that few officials ever speak aloud. Corruption is a survival skill. Back in the capital, before your fall, you used to scoff at whispers of bribes, backroom dealings, and tea boxes that jingled when lifted. Now, you understand. The imperial system was a beautiful machine, but a machine so complex, so fragile, that oiling it unofficially became the only way it kept moving. You start to recall small things. The gift tea that junior scribes presented to senior clerks during the winter solstice. The curious way promotions always followed after someone's third loan to a superior's cousin's funeral. The way your old supervisor always left the best assignments on desks marked with fresh inkstones and seasonal fruit. It wasn't blatant. It wasn't even discussed. But it was everywhere. Some called it the tea trail. The idea that a box of rare Longjing leaves could smooth over a mistake in an audit. Or that a side jar of plum wine delivered accidentally to the registrar's home could help a petition rise to the top of the scroll pile. Historians still argue whether these exchanges constituted true corruption or were just ritual gifts. But for the men involved, the distinction was irrelevant. What mattered was whether the favor was returned. The real professionals, those who survived decades without a single demotion, mastered the art of invisible bribery. They knew how to couch compliments as strategic favors, how to swap influence like jade tokens at a spring festival. They gave to the eunuchs, first the wives, second, and only then, to the officials themselves. One of them, a portly minister named Zhu, once gave a Confucian lecture on ethics by day and distributed mooncakes filled with silver bits by night. He lived to 83, never once censured. You remember once being offered a gift scroll, a rolled bundle, supposedly containing a rare poem. It came from a merchant whose timber contract was pending approval. You declined, politely, righteously. A week later, your proposal was buried in committee. You told yourself it was coincidence, It wasn't. Now, in exile, you see that even at the village level, the same dance continues, just slower, clumsier, and more obvious. Local officials trade rice stores for favors, and the temple monk mysteriously gets extra lumber during the cold season. And here's the twisted part: it works. The roads stay maintained, the granaries stay stocked, the people don't suffer not too much. Because when fear and rigidity choke a system, it's the crooked branches that let light through. You're tempted now, more than once. A merchant offers you a side pouch of silver for your ink supply. A grain inspector hints that a positive report could earn you winter wine. You decline every time, partly out of principle, mostly out of fear. Because while corruption may be survival, it's also a trap. One misstep, one jealous rival, and suddenly that jar of wine becomes evidence. That gift becomes a dagger. You've seen the scrolls case files of men accused not of stealing gold, but of accepting too much gratitude. Their names erased, their property seized. One even had his inkstone broken publicly, a symbolic execution of his authority. So you walk a narrow path, too honest to cheat, too experienced to be naive. You learn to say thank you without accepting anything. You learn to offer help without asking for repayment. You become unintentionally respected, not feared, not envied, just respected. It's not flashy. It won't get you back to the capital, but it keeps your roof intact, your rice bowl full, and your conscience quiet. And in time, others follow suit. Your student refuses a bribe from the tax clerk and writes his first official report with nothing but ink sweat and borrowed proverbs. You pat his shoulder and smile. Be careful, you say, but don't be afraid. Because while corruption may be a shortcut, dignity is a longer road, and sometimes it leads somewhere better. Some nights, when the village is quiet and the ink has dried, you think about the ones who didn't walk the long road, the ones who vanished not into exile, but into silence, into mountains, monasteries, forests, or myth. You've heard the stories. Officials who, facing disgrace, chose not to die, but to disappear. There was Scholar Deng, once a palace tutor. After a failed petition and a mysterious audit, he left the capital without notice. No scroll, no final statement. Decades later, a monk in a northern province was found reciting poems only Deng had ever published. Then there's Madame Shui, one of the rare women to hold informal influence in the Bureau of Imperial Rights. Accused of falsifying tribute reports, she evaded arrest and was believed dead until a folk song appeared in southern villages referencing her exact courtroom speech, rhymed into verse. Historians still debate if these were legends, exaggerations, or simply the empire's attempt to explain the unexplainable. But the phenomenon was real officials shedding their names like snakeskin and becoming other things. You even met one once. Not long after your exile began, an old man arrived in Yanzhou, offering help with temple accounting. His knowledge of script forms was suspiciously exact. His ink strokes had the rhythm of someone trained in capital registries. He called himself June, never spoke of his past. But when you mentioned the Ministry of Weights, he flinched. Slightly, once. Over time, you spoke more. He told you how he once handled budget forecasts for military supplies. One miscalculation, a shipment that went missing, and he knew the inquiry would come. So before it did, he left, traded his seal for sandals. Now, he chants sutras in the morning and teaches orphaned children in the afternoon. Lives off bean porridge and gratitude. And though he never said so, you know he chose survival, not just of the body, but of peace. Many took similar routes. Temple refuge, the most socially acceptable form of escape. In theory, monasteries welcomed all. In practice, a former official brought prestige. They became calligraphers, herb gardeners, bellmasters, their pasts erased behind saffron robes and bowed heads. Others took to the wilderness, became poets, painters, storytellers who wandered from town to town, weaving fragments of old bureaucratic jargon into folk tales that no one quite understood, but everyone liked to hear. You hear these men called many things disgraced, heretics, eccentrics. But to you, they are something else entirely free. Because what is exile really, if you choose it? Is the man who flees the court and finds peace under pine trees more lost than the one who clings to a title waiting for death in silk robes. You begin to understand something strange. Leaving the system might be the only way to live honestly within it. Not everyone can afford that choice, of course. Some have families' debts, hope still tied to the capital. But those who walk away fully silently on their own terms earn a kind of invisible nobility. Even in your village, people speak of the walker, an old man who once wore embroidered boots and now collects mushrooms on the hills. He gives weather advice and never asks for coin. When children ask what he used to do, he smiles and says, "I once owned a lot of scrolls." You nod when you hear this, because you once did too. Time passes. The seasons roll across your little outpost like calligraphy strokes, ink-black winters, golden autumns, the brush-thin greening of early spring. You learn to mark the year, not by court ceremonies or imperial edicts, but by the rhythm of ordinary things. When the plum trees bloom, when the river floods, when the village dog finally stops barking at your shadow. You've been here long enough that new officials have arrived young and full of questions, some with crisp robes, others with eyes too wide. They ask about audit procedures, how to balance account scrolls, whether minor discrepancies should be reported upward. You answer carefully, truthfully, gently. One of them asks, "Were you ever in the capital?" You nod. "Was it glorious?" You pause. "It was loud," you say. They laugh, unsure. You don't elaborate. What they don't know, what many never learn, is that the capital didn't forget you. Not entirely. Because erasure in Imperial China was rarely swift. It was slow, a kind of bureaucratic fading. First, your name is left off a registry. Then your portrait is removed from the gallery. Your writing desk is reassigned. Your signature scrolls archived for future review, which never happens. And eventually, your name becomes a footnote, a former scribe reassigned to provincial duties. No rank, no honors, just that. Unless they decide to take it further. Posthumous dismissal. Yes, it's real. If you died before clearing your name, or if your disgrace grew with time, the empire could issue a retroactive edict. Your name erased from temple rolls. Your ancestral plaque removed. Your title revoked after death. Historians still argue about why. Was it pettiness, ritual balance, a symbolic cleansing of the imperial record? Whatever the reason it happened, sometimes bodies were exhumed, graves relocated, all because someone at court decided that your soul still owed the emperor an apology. You read one such case recently, buried in a village archive. A minor official from the Ming era, dismissed quietly, died peacefully. But 5 years later, his former supervisor was promoted and re-examined old scrolls, found an error, petitioned for retroactive disgrace. His bones were dug up and burned. You sat with that record for a long time, wondered if that could happen to you. Would your student protect your name? Would the villagers care? And then you remember, your daughter still keeps your seal. Wrapped in silk, hidden behind the cooking jars, just in case. Maybe that's enough. You keep writing, not scrolls, but stories. Fables about court life told through animals. The rat who rose too fast. The crane who bowed too low. The ox who read too slowly and was exiled to the mountains. The villagers loved them. You changed names, of course, but the lessons remain. Because the past doesn't vanish. It lingers in laughter, in whispers, in bedtime tales. Even if your title fades, even if no one chants your name in temple prayers, there's something left behind. A sentence, a joke, a warning. And that perhaps is its own kind of immortality. The nights grow quieter as you age. There's a hush to everything now. Not just the village, your thoughts, your bones, even the way your brush moves across paper. You no longer chase answers. You let them come if they feel like it. And so, in these final years, you find yourself visited by ghosts. Not the kind that rattle windows or drift in with mist. These are quieter, paper-thin, bureaucratic. They come as names you remember, people you once shared offices with, bowed beside, nodded to, in endless scroll rooms. Most are long gone. Some fell, some disappeared, a few somehow survived. But the strangest ones are those who were fired after death. Yes, it still happens. An official dies. 10, 20, even 50 years later, someone finds fault in a decision he once made, an expense he once signed, a phrase he once used. A memorial is raised not in honor, but in condemnation. His descendants are notified. His plaque is removed from the family shrine. His soul, in theory, is declared unworthy of reverence. Imagine that. Living a dutiful life, dying with your boots off, only to be demoted from the afterlife. You remember when it happened to Inspector Lee, a stoic man who once taught you how to fold scrolls tightly so the seals didn't crack. He died of stomach illness in his sleep. 20 years later, an audit of canal records blamed him for flood mismanagement. A posthumous edict declared his service incomplete and misguided. His grandson wept in the temple when they took the ancestor tablet down. Historians call it ancestral cleansing, a kind of state-sponsored memory correction. But to you, it feels like haunting in reverse when the living disturb the dead, not the other way around. You begin to wonder, what will they say about you? Will someone find your name on an old grain register and accuse you of carelessness? Will your careful signatures be misread as cowardice? Will your silence be taken for guilt? You try to write a letter to your children, but nothing feels right. Words fail where meaning matters most. So instead, you do something smaller. You light incense. You sit in the courtyard under the mulberry tree, your back warmed by a clay brazier, and you whisper the names of the disgraced, not just those who fell, but those forgotten. You say them aloud, clearly. You say you mattered, even if they said you didn't. And in that moment, under a sky cold with stars and full of memory, you feel a stillness that no edict can revoke. A kind of peace, a kind of freedom, a final bow, not to power, but to truth.